The question is, how much of ourselves will we give away to the technology? They want to make this a policy to implant all newborns with computer chips to make them more competitive in business and so that they can be more successful in life. So the people that are proposing these, they're techies, and all they're saying is we're going to push this technology as far as we can, as fast as we can. But this is how you lose a species. In one generation. They say one of our flaws is human intimacy. The need
It's the only way we exist.
well, what they're saying is when a man and a woman come together to create a new life, it's imperfect because we never know the exact outcome. Through the technology we have now, you can determine the hair color, the IQ. So why not just do that? Why take the chance on something? This is where this thinking is going, Danica.
I'm sitting in Arizona and it never rains here, but it's raining forever. I look at the skies when it's a beautiful sunny day and I see chemtrails all over the place. And I want to get into this sort of sphere of like global warming, geoengineering, chemtrails, EMFs. The other day there was clouds that were absolutely frequency clouds. They aren't natural like that, I feel like. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about transhumanism, consciousness, and somebody just got uplinked to Neuralink, and then kind of just generally how we approach that. You know, I love that quote from Buckminster Fuller that you always mention, which I feel like is at the end of Zeitgeist. Maybe they put it at the end of that movie.
You know, a lot of people are using it now.
Yeah, but and I fight this one too because I've kind of been drawn into this political world, and by drawn in I mean called, and I'm like, man, do I fight or I've always wondered, do I just live my life how I want and not fight anything and keep it going? So those are kind of the buckets I want to get to, but you know, I figured we'd start off with why in the world it's so rainy and awful. And
you are so up my alley today. Gregg and Danica, take one. Here we go.
Okay, let's get into what's been on my mind a lot lately. I live in Arizona and it's been cloudy and it's raining, and I mean, even the West Coast has got a lot of weather right now, but even in just like in Arizona, it's always sunny here, and I'll have a beautiful sunny day and then all of a sudden there's 20 chemtrails in the sky, and I'm like, those are not contrails, those evaporate. These are chemtrails. And just the other day I was leaving my house and I looked up and I was like, what are those clouds? They look like frequency clouds. They have the whole sky was covered in these perfect even frequency clouds, and just in general geoengineering. And I just feel like I get so frustrated when I look up to the sky and I think, how do I escape the control of government and corporations? And to some degree that's the one I feel like is so inescapable. It's global, it's in the sky. Where do I hide from that? So what are they doing to us right now?
You just covered a lot of ground, and you you asked a few questions. So let's begin. I'm a scientist, and I feel like I am qualified, perhaps more than a lot of people in my genre, to talk about this because I'm a degreed geologist. A lot of people are speaking from emotion. I am also a systems thinker, Danica, and I think a lot of your guests are. What that means is we tend to look at the really big picture. We zoom wide to look at the context, and then within that context, we can zoom in on a nanosecond of our lives and find out what that means. So I'm going to begin with the context. We are living a time, there are multiple competing visions for what our world and our lives should look like, based upon multiple competing agendas for what our world and our lives should look like. Now, that statement isn't really anything new because we've lived in a world that's always been that way. What has changed is technology is now allowing those agendas and those visions to take on a new meaning in our lives. And there are two primary areas. They're related, but we can break these down for the purposes of conversation into two topics. There is an effort to remake this planet, and I can say that as a geologist, and I'll talk to you about why that is. There is an effort to remake our humanness, and I feel very, very close to this. And for a lot of reasons, I think we're going to touch as we get into this. The narratives that are needed to do both are now part of what is called fifth generational warfare. And I would imagine maybe some of your guests have talked about this. We are all casualties. Every one of us is a casualty of 5Gen warfare. What is 5Gen warfare? It is a warfare that begins in the mind. It is a psychological warfare that begins with the way we think and the way we see ourselves, our relationship to ourselves, our own bodies, our relationship to other people, our relationship to the world all around us. Financial warfare is a part of that. Mental warfare is a part of that. Psychological warfare, emotional warfare. And the events, I was just at the conference in your backyard. I was just in your part of the world last weekend. And people from all over the world came, Danica, and they can't believe that the events happening in our lives are purely spontaneous. They're saying, they used to believe that. You're saying, isn't it interesting? What a synchronicity. All these things are happening at the same time. This is by design. And there's so many different ways of looking at this. What we know is we've all heard of the World Economic Forum, Davos meetings. They began in 1971. And I've followed the WEF most of my adult life. They have a report that comes out every year. It was on their view and what they think the world needs. And it was always interesting, but it was pretty benign because they had no way to implement their policies. That changed in 2019.
It's important to me that the supplements I take are the highest quality. And that's why for 2 years, I've been drinking AG1. Unlike many supplement brands, AG1 is researched and developed by an in-house team of scientists, doctors, and nutritionalists with decades of experience in their respective fields. So many people have asked me if AG1 is actually the real deal. And trust me, there's a reason why I've been drinking it every morning for so long. Quality for AG1 isn't just a buzzword. It's a commitment backed by expert-leading scientific research, high-quality ingredients, industry-leading manufacturing, and rigorous testing. At each step of the process, AG1 goes above and beyond industry standards. I know I can trust what's in every single scoop of AG1 because of this meticulous process they go through. Taking care of my health shouldn't be complicated, and AG1 simplifies this by covering my nutritional bases and setting myself up for success in just 60 seconds. AG1's ingredients are heavily researched for efficacy and quality. And I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut health. I partnered with AG1 for so long because they make such high quality products that I genuinely look forward to drinking every single morning, first thing in the morning. So if you want to replace your multivitamin and more, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D plus K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/prettyintense. That's drinkag1.com/prettyintense. Check it out.
And a lot of people don't know this. In 2019, the World Economic Forum signed a formal agreement with the United Nations. And the UN is now deeply involved with a project that is called UN SDG 2030, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030. They are, for any viewers that may not be familiar with this, these are 17 goals that were identified by the United Nations that they want to have accomplished by the year 2030. And that program is now being viewed as the implementation arm of the WEF vision. So, and this is not a secret. I mean, there was a news conference. They shook hands. They held up the formalized agreement. Both of them signed, and they believe that this is a healthy thing. What we're seeing, Danica, is a handful of people that we did not elect, trying to implement their ideas of what they believe the world that we live in should look like. And perhaps more importantly, and what touches our lives more deeply, they want to implement the lives that we are living. They want to implement a degree of social engineering in such a brief period of time that it causes tremendous suffering, in my estimation, unneeded. And the people that can afford these changes the most. The people on the very edge of society, people living paycheck to paycheck, they don't have the bandwidth to absorb the kind of social changes that are being implemented. So on a systems level, everything we're going to talk about, if we can keep this in mind, that there is a directed movement. It's not spontaneous. It's not by accident. It's not by accident that our social bonds are being broken, because when we are in a fragmented society, we are more vulnerable and more susceptible to the ideas of other people.
Yeah.
So the big picture, these goals need to be met, and we can talk about why that is and where they're going. The goals were laid out. One of the reasons I know about this, I was invited to speak at the United Nations with a dear friend, spiritual brother, colleague, Dr. Bruce Lipton. And I know,
Love him.
yeah, you know Bruce, a lot of our community here does. Bruce and I were invited to speak at the UN, not, the General Assembly. It was a special group at the UN. And we were invited to give our perspective of what we saw happening in the world. And they work in 15-year segments, Danica. So this was the year 2014 is when we went. Beginning in the year 2000, the UN had created something called UN SDG. It was the Millennial Development Goals is what they were called, MDGs, in the year 2000, 15-year plan. In the year 2014, they said, okay, that plan expires. What do we do for the next 15 years? And that takes us into 2030. So that's where that 2030 comes from. Bruce spoke from a life sciences perspective. I spoke from an earth sciences perspective, and also from a humanistic perspective of how we follow cycles and rhythms of nature, financial cycles, conflict cycles, war cycles. These are all linked into natural rhythms. We could do a whole program on that. So that was where I began to understand what was happening with this, with these sustainable development goals. The feeling has been that they're lagging behind in their implementation, because most people, when they find out what's happening, nobody wants it. So let me just say something about the Sustainable Development Goals. If you go to the website now, and don't do it now because you're watching this podcast, but after the podcast, if you do it, they are beautiful goals in Word. Who wouldn't want them? Who wouldn't want to reduce poverty? And for people who are in poverty, who wouldn't want a healthy world, and universal health and things like that? Then you read the fine print of how they want to accomplish those goals. And the only way to accomplish those goals is to remake the world and remake our lives in ways that touch every facet of our lives, Danica. And no one has asked us about this. We didn't elect these officials. Most of them are behind the scenes. We don't even know who they are. And when you read that fine print, you say, well, people aren't going to go for that. So the only way to go for that is to create a world where that vision makes sense, or a world where that vision looks attractive. One of the catalysts for that is the false narrative of climate change. And this is really tricky. And I want to be really, really clear with our viewers. I'm going to look right in the camera it's your community, my family, and my community too. Climate change is a fact. And as a geologist, we were talking about this in 1979. I remember talking about this and what we need to do to adapt to the climate change that is happening as a result of rhythmic cycles. You can go back before humans ever appeared on Earth. We only showed up 200,000 years ago. You go back into the ice cores before that, and exactly the same rhythms are there.
You're the one that's proved that to me with the whole global warming thing, and what's ever happening is like, yes, when you zoom in on right now, it looks like we're in trouble. But when you zoom out up to a million years or whatever I've seen, it just goes in these rhythms.
Well, so this is, I didn't know what we would talk about. This is completely unscripted. Ladies and gentlemen, completely unscripted, the Gregg and Danica show. I just did a video on this, and I have a couple of notes that I can refer to
Love
for
to.
accuracy.
Yeah.
So the climate change is a fact, and this is where it gets really tricky, uh, because what the science is showing is that humans are not the cause of the climate change, and a lot of the fear that's being driven is on one facet of climate change. That is the story of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, we're being told that carbon dioxide levels are higher than they've ever been, that they are in dangerously high levels, that they're causing the warming on the planet. Planet is, going to die in 10 years, is what some of our politicians have said. It's on, the YouTube videos. So this is where I want to be really, really clear about this.
Mm.
We are not causing, there is an increase in carbon dioxide, first of all. And that increase is not being driven largely by human industry. We are certainly contributing to it.
Sure.
But NASA.gov, you can go right to their website. I've got a direct quote right here, right off of NASA.gov. 90% of global warming is occurring in the ocean, causing the waters to internal heat to increase. All right, so what's happening is the oceans are warming. And if you remember any high school or maybe even grade school physics, water holds more gas when it's cold. Cold oceans hold a lot of oxygen, a lot of carbon dioxide. The ocean is called a sink, S-I-N-K. It's one of the largest carbon dioxide absorbers on the planet. So whatever carbon dioxide is being put out, oceans and forests are absorbing that. When the water warms, it means those little molecules are moving fast. It can't hold as much carbon dioxide. So the ocean is releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So there is more CO2. Where's it coming from? 90% is coming from the oceans. And let me just, to help people with kind of when I hear these numbers, statistics, it's hard to wrap your mind around them.
Mm.
Humans produce between 38 and 40 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year. So it's a lot. Most of that is reabsorbed by forests and oceans. The oceans produce about 340 gigatons per year. So 40 versus 340. So we know, and scientists know, that a lot of this is coming from the oceans. Now, so already we're saying, okay, there is climate change. There is an increase in CO2. Humans are contributing, but we're not the cause of this. The oceans are contributing to this. And where the UN and the WEF, now where they're coming down on this is they're telling people that this is carbon dioxide is poison, it's bad, it's dangerous. We need to reduce this CO2. So as a geologist, what I can say is this, and if this is where, oh man, there's so many places we can go with this. If you look at a map that is on some of the websites that are out there, it's cherry-picked data. So do we have more CO2 than we had 10 years ago? Absolutely, hands down, no argument. Do we have more than we had 50 years ago? Yes, we do. Is it the most Earth has ever had? Absolutely not. We are on, even with that increase, we're on the low end of where the CO2 levels typically are on our planet. We go back, okay, so right now I don't know the number, I think it's between 417 and 421 parts per million, depending on where you get the data. So right now we are averaging somewhere between 417, 420 parts per million. You go back in the ice cores in geologic time, and I've got a couple of notes from the last video that I did. If we go back to the Jurassic period, everybody knows Jurassic because of the movie, Jurassic Park. We had over 1,000 parts per million CO2. The average global temperature in Fahrenheit, daytime was about 80.6 degrees, and the average nighttime temperature is about 59 degrees. Then you go to the Cretaceous. Now, this is really interesting. The Cretaceous period, the average carbon dioxide was 2,000 parts per million. Now, keep in mind, we're only 417, 421, and the temperature was still average 82 degrees in the day, 52 at night.
Wow.
You cannot say with 100% certainty that CO2 an increase in CO2
Mhm.
caused an increase in temperature. And as a matter of fact, and we've got videos showing this very clearly, there are times when the CO2 levels have been high, the temperatures have been low. There are times when the CO2 levels have been low and the temperatures have been high. And there's another factor, and I'm going to get to it. But the point I'm making is that what we're being told, Danica, is not true.
Yeah.
And I want to be really clear. This isn't about making somebody wrong. I don't want to make somebody wrong, because a lot of the people out there are simply repeating, because they're not scientists. They're
Yeah.
repeating I mean, I like some of the news personalities that I hear. They're repeating lies that
Sure.
someone else is, and even politicians, they're not scientists.
Yeah.
They get on a righteous soapbox and they repeat data, but the data is not supported by the evidence. And I'm going to talk about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have the greatest amount of CO2 we've ever had. We're on the low end when you look at geologic history. We don't have the Earth. During those times, Jurassic and Cretaceous, what did Earth look like? Earth was green, lush. Forests were green and lush. And we had much less ice on the planet because it was warmer. It was a warmer climate. Is it warmer than today? Yes. Is it the end of the world? No. Now, I did a little experiment in January of 23, because I could see what was happening. And here in the office, I took a few days and I said, okay, let's accept all of the numbers that we're being given as benchmarks by the UN, by the WEF. Let's accept those. Let's say we meet those marks. What does Earth look like? What does my world look like?
You're saying the projection of what they say.
This is what they're asking us to turn our world and our lives upside down, cause a lot of suffering, and in some cases, death. Because when you cut out the energy sources in the middle of winter in Northern Europe and have nothing to substitute that with, people are dying. And that happened, that has happened.
Yeah.
And even parts of America are having problems with that. So I said, what if we met the CO2 goals that they want? So they're taking 2010 levels and they want a 45% reduction from 2010. And so they're saying, stop drilling, stop. And so here's where this gets tricky. I'm not saying burn, burn, burn. I'm not saying that. I want to have that conversation as well. This is where it's a very intricate conversation. Because if we truly wanted a source of energy that produced zero greenhouse gases, could not be weaponized, could not melt down like a Fukushima reactor, is abundant and inexpensive. We've had that for over 70 years, and we'll talk about that as well. So let's just stay with the CO2 right now. If we met those CO2 goals, they want a 45% reduction from the 2010 levels. That would push us back, Danica, to a global carbon dioxide level of right around 280-ish parts per million. This is a really low CO2 level. What scientists tell us, what biologists tell us, is if CO2 drops to about 185 parts per million, that it's a death sentence for the forests. That is untenably low CO2 levels. And it's not like you can dial, parts per million, a couple here, a couple there. 185 is dangerous. They want to push this back to 210. That is really close to that 185. Okay, what does that mean? What does Earth look like if we do that? So I went to a geologic map, and the last time our planet, and they want to reduce the average global temperature by about 11 degrees. From right now, we're about 56 degrees average global temperature. They want it back down to 40, 45-ish degrees global average. That's a cool planet. So they want a cool planet and low CO2. The last time we saw this, Danica, was during a time in geologic history called the Pleistocene era. This was when about 30% of the Earth was covered with ice. The ice killed the forests. The CO2 levels were about 250 parts per million. That's scientific fact. Why in the world would we want to take this beautiful, lush green planet back to a time when the temperatures are about 11 degrees cooler, on average, CO2 levels lower, forests are dying, more ice on the planet?
When we're not hot, we're in an ice age.
Well, what you have to say this is it's not good for us. It's not good for humans. So who's it good for? That could be a whole conversation unto itself as well. But what
population control, does this feed into a population control narrative or no?
It may. I would have to speculate on that because I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But it certainly is not good for us. Why? I mean, why? And they want to do this in 6 years. They're trying to meet these goals by the year 2030. So what we're saying now, I just covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
CO2 is not a poison. It is necessary. And I think most of our viewers know that we exhale CO2, but in this beautiful symbiotic relationship with the plants, your house plants, your philodendron and your roses and all the forests, they inhale the CO2 that we exhale. So when there is more CO2, and NASA has just come out and they said this, Earth is now greener and lusher than it has been in over 20 years because of the little bit of the increase of CO2. We really haven't increased that much. And already Earth is greener and lusher than it has been. So CO2, we're not the highest levels we've ever been. Earth is not the warmest it's ever been. Now, in all fairness, I want to be very honest about this. There was another time in geologic history, the Triassic period. CO2 levels were also about 2,000 parts per million, and the temperature was warmer. It was like Dubai all over the world. The average global temperature was about 122 degrees. That's Phoenix temperatures in the summer.
Exactly.
It's warm. It's warmer than we are now. It's not a death sentence to the planet. But see, look at what's happening. Here's Triassic, 2,000 parts per million, 122 degrees. Here's Cretaceous, 2,000 parts per million, and it's only 82 degrees. It's not the CO2 that's driving this. So now, what is? Okay, so what is? Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting. So I'm going to go back to the NASA.gov statement. It's saying the 90% of the global warming is occurring in the oceans, causing the water's internal heat to increase. The oceans are warming from underneath. The glaciers are melting from underneath. If it was atmospheric warming, as we're being asked to accept, if it was because the air is warmer, you would expect those glaciers to melt from on top. The oceans are warming from underneath. As a geologist, this is fascinating to me. The reason the oceans are warming from underneath is because of a phenomenon that only happens about every 12 to 13,000 years. So we haven't seen it.
Cycles.
We haven't seen it in our lifetime. And if you don't think in terms of cycles, if you're looking at 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, you're never going to see this. And then there's the political component where a phenomenon is being used as disingenuously as the leverage to force people into accepting change that benefits a few and hurts a lot of people. Does that make sense if I say it that way?
100%.
And I'm sure you've had other guests say the same thing. So what's happening is there is a process. And I mean, I don't know how deep I don't want this to be really technical, but there is a process every 12, 13,000 years. There are dynamics underneath our feet in what is called the core of the Earth. So basic geology, Earth is not solid. We've got layers underneath our feet. And the inner layer is called the core. It's a solid. It is a solid, dense solid. It's made of iron and nickel. And the outer core around that is molten. And around that is the mantle. It's about 1,800 miles thick. And then the crust floats on top of the mantle. There's a dynamic that I won't get into unless you want to, that is forcing, they're called perturbations. They're ripples in the outer mantle from the core, forcing molten magma from the mantle up toward the crust in the places where the crust is weak and thin. the crust is thin under the oceans and it's weak at the plate boundaries. So what we're seeing is exactly what you expect to see. We're seeing an increase in earthquakes. We're called large magnitude 6 and greater, large scale earthquakes, and volcanics. You look at okay, so this forcing is created two massive plumes under the earth. One is under the Pacific, and so that's where you're going to see the earthquakes and the volcanics, you know, in Galapagos Islands, Hawaii, the Pacific Ring of Fire, Japan on one side, and then usually it balances back out with Alaska and California on the other side. The good news is that rather than having one big earthquake in California, there's like this slow, continuous, low-level rumble, which is good. It's you can't really tell where one earthquake stops and the other one begins, but there's such a low magnitude and they're so deep, you don't notice it. And it's good because we're very blessed in this way, because it means there's a slow, gradual, continuous release rather than
an explosion.
A quiet time and all of a sudden, boom, you know. So, and then the other place where this plume is coming up is in Northern Africa and underneath the Middle East. Right underneath the Middle East, where do we see the big earthquakes? Turkey, 7.8 magnitude, and there was another one, Pakistan, India. And it's interesting because as a geologist, I'd love to see these things. There is a place right there, what's called a triple plate junction. There are three plates that actually come together right at that place, and the magma is being pushed up under there.
In Turkey, in the Middle East, is that where you're referring to now?
It is. And the last time we saw this happen was during a time, and there has been a whole History Channel special done on this period of time. It's a time called the Younger Dryas. And it's interesting because it has direct impact on the rise and fall of civilizations. It is now
Atlantis. Is this Atlantis? And
well, it could. It's believed that there were technologically advanced civilizations, and one of the arguments that archaeologists have is how come we haven't found them? The assumption is that Earth is static. That if they were there, we would see it in the desert sticking up out of the sand. The reality is that during these cycles, there are times when the oceans rise, so those civilizations are now underwater. There are times when volcanoes, what are called supervolcanoes, erupt, and they bury these civilizations. And it happens. I've got a YouTube video, and I just did this for on Gaia TV. They have a program called Ancient Civilizations. And we just recorded this on Ancient Civilizations. What happens is during this cycle, there is always one major, it's called a super volcano. And we haven't had one yet. The last one was about 13,000 years ago. It's in a place called the Phlegrean Fields. It's in Italy. And then you go back another 12 to 13,000 years, and it's also in the Phlegrean Fields in Italy. And then you go back from that, and there's one in Russia, and you go back from that, and there's one in Indonesia. And we can do this all the way back. We can look at these cycles back over 72,000 years. Every 12 to 13,000 years is when this molten magma begins to move in this way. One of the byproducts is it warms the ocean, releasing CO2 into the atmosphere and causing climate change. Every 12 to 13,000 years, if you look at cosmological cycles, I know some of your guests have done this because I watch the Danica Patrick podcasts and I like to see your guests. 13,000 years is one half of the precession of the equinox, is the 26,000 year cycle. Something is happening, and again, this goes on and on. It happens in the core, in the center of our Milky Way, releasing a volley of cosmic radiation that takes about 13,000 years to travel and reach our solar system, and we're in that now. It's happening now. To some people, I'm going to acknowledge right now, to some people, what we're saying is a very different way of thinking, and I totally acknowledge that. and I would never attempt to convince or persuade you of anything. I'm sharing this information for this reason. We've just taken a little journey in terms of what's happening with our planet. Now I'm going to bring this back around and answer the second part of your question. This phenomenon is being used. It's being weaponized, Danica, rather than talking to people in a kind way and say, we are living a time of extremes and something is happening. Let's work together as nations. Let's work together as people. It doesn't have to be a problem if we're prepared for it. You do simple things. You bury the power grid under the earth, so whatever the extreme weather is, people still have power. They still have electricity in the winter. The telephone poles don't go down. Wires don't get covered with ice. You encourage people maybe to have a little extra food in case the roads are closed, in case the storms are bad, which happens during these periods of time. And people work together. But look at what's happening. This is being, rather than being used to bring us together in community, which could still happen, it's being weaponized to divide us. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. I live in a rural community in northern New Mexico. This last two summers ago, there was a climate rally outdoors downtown. They had speakers come in. They carried the narrative. They angered young people. They frightened young people. And they empowered young people after the rally to go into the community and vandalize anything they felt was contributing to the horrible CO2 that was happening. So they vandalized cars, they vandalized trucks, they vandalized businesses. And this divides us. It divides us as a community. And when the time when we most need to come together as family and community, we're living this rare, amazing time in the history of our planet. So this is one place. Now we'll go back to the beginning of the conversation. WEF, the UN have chosen these goals. And the only way to meet these goals is to turn our lives and our worlds upside down, eliminating all fossil fuels. And what's so interesting, Danica, oil is one of the few components that cannot be replicated in the laboratory. And oil is about more than the gas in my truck. We use oil, and we don't even know this. Every one of us watching this, oil contributes over 6,000 places in our everyday lives. We couldn't be having this conversation on this computer with these wires and these cables and these components. I wouldn't have the water coming in to my house. People say, okay, solar panels and windmills. What they don't know is they are tremendously fossil fuel intensive to create. They are toxic as hell, made of 17 rare earth minerals and they are just that. They're rare. They're not common, found in just a couple of deposits on this planet, mostly in countries that are not our close allies, China and Russia primarily. Cobalt comes from Democratic Republic of Congo. And I did a video on this, and it brings tears to my eyes to watch it. These kids, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, they send these kids into these pits, barefoot, shorts, t-shirts, no protective gear, nothing, no masks, to work with their bare hands to pull the cobalt ore out of the mud. They put them in these little cloth baskets and send them up to the adults who clean this stuff up, and then they sell it to China. China takes that and then makes it into the products they sell to us for our batteries. We need the cobalt for our batteries. If we're going to go all electric cars, that's where it comes from. There's a little bit from Australia, but not much. So the fallacy of green, and I like solar. I've got 19 solar panels running the studio where I am right now.
Wow. I have some too on my house.
Yeah, and I like the idea. It is not one size fits all. Solar panels are not going to power this planet through the extremes. You need something it's called base load energy. You need a sustainable form of base load energy that works no matter what the temperature, wind, no wind, sun, no wind, 50 degrees below, 150 above. We have the technology to do that. Solar and wind are not doing that. They're okay regionally where it makes sense. But the only time they're green Danica, is when they are actually functioning. When those solar panels on the roof for 20 years, they are green. They are toxic to produce, and at the end of their life cycle, they're toxic in the landfills where those 17 rare earth elements are leaching into the groundwater, lakes, rivers, and streams, causing a lot of human health problems, food chain supply problems. It takes a tremendous, you have to build the steel for the windmills. You have to have concrete for the windmills. And what a lot of people don't know is the silicon for a solar panel it's not naturally occurring in the earth. It takes high temperatures to take the silica from the earth to create those the silicon that we use in the solar panels, and those temperatures cannot be achieved using solar panels. Only fossil fuels are able to do that. So it's tricky because we tend to think binary. It's either all good or all bad.
Yeah.
Drill and burn fossil fuels or don't. And I think it's more nuanced than that.
Wow.
So
it's just an energy exchange, right? You want to get from point A to point B. It's going to take something.
It is. So now your first statement, first sentence we're covering so much ground, and I'm aware of the time, and I want to honor you, and I want to honor our community.
Such a good deep dive. I'd rather stay on a topic and excavate it really well. So everything you've said is so important to know, and to convince people of what's going on. They need this backstory. Otherwise, it's just, one more person that could be perceived as propaganda or trying to do something for their own good. But you're giving statistics as a scientist and as a geologist. This is undeniable statistical facts, and that's what people need to know.
Well, we do not want to reduce our CO2 levels to the level that they're asking us to do it. That's not good for us. It's not good for our planet. And so what's interesting now, here we are. This is February. We have just in January, we just had two big meetings. We had the COP28, which is the big climate summit that was held in Dubai. And on the tail of that, we had Davos and the World Economic Forum. Climate is being used now. They've identified this narrative, and they're going to use this as the leverage to implement social change, social policy, and it takes politics to do that. And, this is growing up as a kid, I wanted to believe, Danica, that science is a place that would always be true and pure, and that politics wouldn't find their way into science. And sadly, that has not happened. So the science has been politicized. False narratives are being published. I just put up a video. This is fascinating. People say, okay, where does the UN get the numbers? Where do they get the information that they're feeding to CNN, to MSNBC, to Fox News or NPR, anybody?
Good question.
So it's based on climate models. These are computer models that they're using in an attempt to model climate. Now, when I was in college back in the 70s, I worked with computer modeling.
It's their own data. This is not third-party data. This is their own generated data.
Well, yes and no. So I worked with computer models back in the 70s. I worked in an area called remote sensing at Colorado State University. As a geology major, there was a remote sensing department. And it was primitive compared to what we're doing today. I mean, the models were nowhere near what they are today, and I understand how they work. So what they do is, and I show this on this video, it's fascinating. They will divide the entire planet Earth into a grid, little squares that work vertically in the atmosphere so they're like cubic. Like you can think of Earth being covered by billions of sugar cubes.
Okay.
And each cube has a mathematic representation of what is happening in that cube. What is the temperature of the air? What is the temperature of the water? What cloud cover, reflectivity, humidity, all kinds of, and they do that for every one of those little cubes. And that is how they create a model. Well, there was congressional testimony just a couple of years ago. So Congress knows this. They brought in some of the scientists who were working with these models. And what they did was they took the projections from the models, which are all showing a very hot Earth.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody's talking about. And then on top of that, Danica, they plotted real-time data from satellites, from balloons. They sent balloons up into the atmosphere, sensors, and the estimates are doing this. The real-time data is down here like this. So the term is that the models are running hot. That's the term. And they are running hot. And it's because the dynamics of our planet are so poorly understood that they cannot accurately model the climate into the. Let me tell you how flawed they are.
Sure.
If it's a good model, you should be able to take a period of time that's already happened.
Sure, and plug it back in.
Go back and plug in what was the
CO2, the temperatures. It doesn't make sense.
Well, and they do that, and the models are still wrong.
Of course.
And they know that. So the congressional testimony, the scientists that were testifying, they said that these models are so flawed that they should never be considered as the basis for policy.
Well, yeah.
And this is congressional testimony, and now this is what's happening. But the data has been weaponized in a way, it's just insidious what they're doing, because they're breaking the social bonds of our society. If you sit down with parents and kids at a dinner table, the kids are in their social media silo. Okay. Whatever algorithms they're looking at are feeding in the data. Same with the parents. And at the dinner table, they're getting different data, and it brings them to blows. This is happening in the office place. It's happening with our friend. It's happening with my friends. It's happening with colleagues that you and your community would know because they're authors. Some of them you probably had on this program who believe, and I've asked, it's happening with political candidates. I have asked political candidates who are running for what is arguably the most powerful position in our nation, possibly on Earth, with the largest, most powerful economy and the most powerful military on the face of the planet. And I asked them, where do you get the data? Where do you get the information for the platform that you're presenting to me? And I've had them look at me and say, well, I watch TV like everybody else. They're basing their platforms on information that is coming through these algorithms and these filters, and it's shredding our society, Danica. And that's the sad thing.
Wow. So the question is two parts. I want to talk about the details of like how they're weaponizing. What are they doing? Talking about chemtrails and geoengineering and the things that we're experiencing in these frequency clouds I've seen, or maybe that's what I think they are. What are they doing? And then ultimately, what are they hoping to accomplish with this misinformation or these lies or these terrible models that are trying to generate advantage for the few instead of the many?
Yeah, well, and I really want to emphasize, this is not about people being angry, although I can see where people can be angered by this. It's not about making somebody wrong. This is our world, it's our planet, and it's in our bodies. And we have a handful of people that are trying. In my opinion, there's some things you shouldn't mess with. The orbit of Earth, which they want to change the orbit of the Earth to change the climate. That's one of the propositions. The natural sunlight that reaches us from our beautiful sun.
Exactly.
There are proposals. They want to modify that. And the DNA in our bodies, they want to modify that. And there's a place where these all come together. And it's not conspiracy. It's not because it's on their websites and it's in their information. They're telling us what they believe is good for us in a world that is the vision that they have. And now they being organizations like, not exclusively, but like the WEF and the UN, who have a lot of influence right now. There are other organizations as well. So I also want to be really clear, not everybody working in those organizations are bad people. There are some really good people working in the UN. I've met them, and they come from a time, Danica, where the UN was highly esteemed. And maybe when you and we both grew up in the Midwest. You're a Midwestern girl, aren't you?
Right, Illinois.
Yeah, when I was in Missouri, we were neighbors. And you probably saw my 1969 Pontiac GTO with a 4-barrel Rochester carburetor flying through your state at one point. I don't know.
I missed you. You were going too fast.
I probably was. It was a beautiful machine. So when I was a kid, the UN was really I mean, it's like the aspiration of people to want to work and contribute. The UN has been hijacked, but it's not everyone. There's still good people there. There are good people in the World Economic Forum. It's not, I have friends that were there not this year, but last year, were invited to go there. So there are some people that don't know what's going on and they feel like they're helping the world and they really want to help. And I'm acknowledging that. There are other people that don't really take the time to look into this stuff and they're just like going with the flow,
Yeah.
and that's what they're doing. And then there are a few people that know exactly what they're doing.
Mm.
And that is true with the politicians. And we see it locally. I see it here locally, and I'm seeing it, of course, on another level. Where this gets really interesting, this year, something is happening on Earth this year. It's never happened. Over 40 nations are electing new leaders in the same year.
Yeah.
And the concern is, what direction will those leaders lead their nations and lead our planet? So they're using this information, the false narrative, as leverage, so that people
To
will get
lead
with,
towards different leaders.
to
So that
get
it's
with,
easier to do what they want to do.
to get with the program. So and none of this is new. I'm not saying anything right here that isn't, I mean, if you read the book, The Great Reset, if you see any of the interviews that are done from people, the Great Reset is what the World Economic Forum proposed during COVID. They said the world's in chaos. Let's remake the world. And they want it done now within 6 years. We're not wired for that, Danica. America's not wired for it, but most people aren't wired for it because it means that we have to relinquish sovereignty and freedom on an individual level, on a community level, certainly on a national level. And it's going to happen in one generation. We've got one generation to choose what it is that we value. Do we truly value our personal sovereignty, the sovereignty of our bodies? Do we cherish the freedom to create and to imagine and to come together in community without having an oversight, of a greater organization governing or dictating what we're doing? I mean, this is all.
Like, are we capable? Are we capable of being good human beings and
yeah, and it's not just America.
Way.
I've spent a lot of time. I was in Italy, I was in Paris, I was in London, I was in Prague. I mean, this is up for everybody right now, and it's confusing to people because if you don't know the context, it looks like the world is just coming apart at the seams. And there is certainly greed, and money certainly can play a role, but when you start talking about the people we're talking about, they have more money than they'll ever need. It's not about money for them. This is about an insidious form of power.
Yeah.
So now I'm just going to mention this. We don't have to talk about in this program. There's a fundamental battle that has played out on this planet from day one between good and evil. And what we're talking about is not separate from that battle. The battle between good and evil, and I'm not talking in a religious sense, but our humanness is part of the equation for what we're talking about here. Because when we are fully enabled and fully capacitated humans, when we are at our best, we are these extraordinary creatures that cannot be controlled. Because we have access. Now, I'm going to use a word, and then I'll define the word. And it's a word that's a trigger word for a lot of people, but it's really on the line. It's all those things that we talked about are all on the line right now because of what is called our divinity, human divinity. And it has nothing to do with religion. If you look at the definition of divinity, it's really interesting, Danica. Divinity is our ability to transcend perceived limitations. That's it. Our ability not to survive, but to become more than perceived. They may not even be real limitations. Our ability to become more than our perceived or real limitations. What does that mean? Divinity plays out, it's a part of us that's timeless, it's ageless, it is the source of our direct knowing, it's where our creativity comes from, it's where our imagination comes from. My wife is a voting member of the Grammys, and we had the opportunity to go to the Grammys a couple of years ago, physically go. I'm a musician when I'm not doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
I would ask these amazing people, I'd say, where in the world did those lyrics come from that just won you that Grammy or that piece of music? How did that happen? And Danica, honest to God, everyone down to a T gave me the same answer. Everyone said it didn't come from me. It came through me.
Exactly.
That
You could
is the
probably
part.
ask authors that. You could
Oh, yeah.
probably ask all kinds of, you could even probably ask a public speaker that. Anything where there's an altered state of high level of delivery, I think is sort of a channeled experience.
Scientists,
My
engineers,
driving.
your driving mothers,
Yeah.
all of these things. And this opens the door to an aspect of the science that a lot of people are not aware of.
Yeah.
But it is that our memories and our skills don't live in the cells of our bodies. They don't live, our memories don't live in our neurons. When I go plug in a guitar and I play a song, that doesn't live inside of me. My neurons are the antenna that
Mm-hmm.
tune to a place in the field where that information resides. Scientists now acknowledge there's a field that underlies all of creation. No controversy there. The controversy is, what is our relationship to that field?
Sure. So these would describe like a prodigy, someone that just sort of knows how to do things, whether it be play piano or sing or math or something, that they are connected to a specific area of the field to get this information.
Well, here's a perfect example. And I know we've all done this. Everyone listening has done this. If you're a musician, you've tried to learn a new piece of music. Steve Vai is my guitar hero, is an amazing contemporary, is just a very powerful rock guitarist. Or you've tried to learn a language. You try to learn Spanish or Tibetan or Chinese. You go through the motions at first. You play some notes that sound funny, or you say words that sound funny. Then all of a sudden, one morning you get up and like you're thinking in Spanish and it all comes together, or that piece comes together. Well, here's what happened. During the time that you were trying to learn and when it actually happened, the act of us choosing to become something greater in the future moment than we are in the present moment, the act of us choosing to excel, choosing to become a better version of ourselves, is the trigger in biology for the neurons to find other neurons to connect to build the antenna that tunes to the place in the field where French or Spanish or Steve Vai's guitar lives.
Well, it's all sweet Joe Dispenza. You have to, imagine a place greater than where you're at.
Exactly. Joe, my brother Joe and I worked together for years, and we used to talk about this a lot. So this is important. And I'm going to bring this back to the transhumanism that you asked me about, because we only can access our own divinity, the best version of ourselves, when we have the biology to tune to that field, the DNA, the neurons, the cell membranes. Don't think of them as sticky, gooey stuff in the body. Think of them from an IT perspective. We're talking about antenna. We're talking about resonance. And Nassim, my dear brother Nassim, talks about this all the time. We become the best version of ourselves when we reach deep inside of our biology and tune to our deep intuition that is in that field, to our direct knowing, to our imagination, to our creativity, to our learning skills. It's only possible through biology. Now there is a movement further dividing us as families and societies, breaking the social bonds. There's a movement that is teaching our young people that we are weak, powerless, and flawed forms of life, that humans are flawed, and that we need something outside of us to be successful in life, and to be healthy in the world, and that something is being touted as technology.
Mm.
And the movement now has grown to a point where it has a name. It's called the transhuman. Trans means beyond. So the beyond human movement, where body parts, body chemistry, body systems, immune systems, memory systems are now being replaced. The proposal is to do this on the large scale, but it's already happening in some societies, are being replaced by AI, computer chips in the brain, sensors in the skin, chemicals in the blood.
Yeah.
Now, so just think about what we just did here. If our divinity, and this is a very ancient concept linked to the battle between good and evil, if our divinity is directly linked to our biology that communicates with the field, and you begin to replace that biology with synthetics that have no DNA, that
Yeah.
have no neurons, and cannot communicate with the field,
Mm.
what does that mean to us? What does that do to us?
Well, I mean, it creates local robots. I mean,
It
we,
means we are still human, but we lose an aspect of our humanness.
yeah,
We lose our divinity, and without that, we become vulnerable and susceptible to the leverage
yeah,
that is being applied to meet those goals, whether
yeah.
it's in 2030 or Ray Kurzweil. I don't know if you're familiar, Ray Kurzweil is an amazing author. He's a science fiction author. He is the director of one facet of the engineering at Google now, working with AI.
Mm.
And very famously said in an interview recently, he said by the year 2035, we will all be a hybrid species to some degree. We will all have RFID chips, computer chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, sensors under the skin. We will become a hybrid species. Now, this is from a scientific perspective. So I'm going to make a distinction. I'm going to leave the science and I'm going to go to Gregg. I feel a deep passion for helping our community to understand how rare we are, how precious we are as a species, how sacred we are, and that our bodies, what the ancients called the vessel, they literally called this the vessel.
Mm.
This isn't about religion. It's the vessel that holds the way to get to that knowledge. It's the vessel that holds the way to get to the
Sure.
imagination and the creativity. I think our greatest task in life, and I think our greatest level of mastery, Danica, is to preserve the integrity of the vessel that gives us our humanness. Because if we give this away in one generation, the question is how much of ourselves will we give away to the technology? And it's like the floodgates. Once it
Yeah.
happens, it's going to happen. It won't be like 10 years from now. This is happening right now. There's a proposal right now. They want to make this a policy to implant all newborns by the year 2030, 2035, to implant them with computer chips to make them more competitive in business and so that they can be more successful in life. So the people that are proposing these, and I want to be really clear, they're not all bad people. They're techies. What they're tunnel vision, and all they're saying is this: we're gonna push this technology as far as we can, as fast as we can, unless somebody pushes back on it. But this is
Mm.
how you lose a species in
Mm-hmm.
one generation. They say one of the things, one of our flaws, is human intimacy and the
It's
need
the only way
for,
we exist.
what they're saying is when a man and a woman come together to create a new life, it's imperfect because we never know the exact outcome. So what they're saying is through the technology we have now, you can determine the hair color, the eye color, the IQ, fast twitch muscles, slow twitch muscles for athletic performance. So why not just do that? Why take the chance on something? This is where this thinking is going, Danica. So,
Wow.
so for me, technology is not right, wrong, good or bad. It is how we apply it. It's the thinking. I'll give you an example. A computer chip in the brain of a man or a woman who's lost their arms in battle in Afghanistan. that allows them to use the prosthetics of their arms to hold their babies and to brush their own teeth and to feed themselves. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. I mean, who wouldn't want that? So the computer chip can be a beautiful thing, but to replace to recreationally to
Right.
put one in the brain so that you can communicate with your computer without a cable.
Right.
So what is the problem with this? Here's the problem. Our natural biology begins to atrophy if we don't use it. If you have a computer chip in the brain and it's in a part of the brain it's in the neocortex, maybe it's in the neocortex that has a very specific kind of neuron. Maybe it's a mirror neuron or that Joe would talk about or something like that. Pretty soon, we are so finely attuned to subtle energies in our world. And if we don't use that, the body says, well, maybe you don't need that anymore. The same with reproduction, the same with the immune system. If we create an artificial immune system, our natural immune system says, maybe you don't need me anymore.
You give yourself a hormone and your body stops producing it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So we're at this point now, and all this is happening together. And it's a complex conversation, and it's a big conversation. And I think it's important to be aware of it because the context, the big picture, we keep going back, is there's a vision for a world, and the way we are right now would not fit into that world by the year 2030. The Great Reset wants a world where everything is digitized, everything is controlled. And if you have access to your divinity, then you value freedom and you cherish sovereignty. But if you lose that divinity, if you lose that access, you're still alive, you're still a human, but it doesn't take on the same significance. As long as you're comfortable, you got some junk food to eat, you got a video game, and you get a paycheck from the government, you're happy, you know?
It's like they're trying to tell you what your potential should be. Like so the real question then becomes now, what in your opinion is our true human potential?
Well, this is, and it's going to tie into the question of what do we do? So now that we have an awareness, not to be fearful. Please don't be afraid of the changes. We have to choose. We've never done this. Our society has been fragmented. The social bonds have been broken, Danica, so that we don't have a voice. It began with the rich against the poor in 2011, the Occupy movement. And then it was men against women, and then Christians against Muslims, and then Jews against Muslims, and blacks against whites. And now it's adult against child, and male against female, gender blurring, all of these things. They're all important, and they all need to be discussed. And we could discuss them kindly to bring us together as a tight community. They've been weaponized to divide us. And when we are divided, we lose our social bonds. And without those social bonds, we are vulnerable as a society. So when we lose our humanness, when we lose our ability to access that divinity, we don't have the same ideas of freedom and sovereignty. So what has never happened as a society, we've never said, this is what we value. We've never come together, and we have to do that. In the new world that's emerging, there's a new world emerging. And rather than peripheral, this needs to be the foundation. What is it that we value in life? Do we value freedom? And what does that mean? Do we value imagination? Do we value creativity? Do we value the sovereignty of our own bodies?
The beauty of nature.
Exactly. Our ability to appreciate nature through the senses. All of that is diminished through the transhuman movement. So we have to choose what it is that we value. And I think we're at a point where we have to do that now. We have to do that now. So all the things we've talked about, for some people, it sounds frightening. It's already happening. It's been going on since you were alive and I was alive, and we didn't even know it. So it's not to be afraid of, it's to be aware of. And so now what do you do? If you fight back, you sink to the level that keeps you stuck in the ancient battle that is playing out to begin with. You don't want to fight back. And this is Buckminster Fuller.
I love this. I love this. I love this quote. And I want you to really get nuanced about the difference of fighting itself. What does making the change versus fighting look like?
Sure. When we fight, we succumb to the hate, and we succumb to the anger, and we succumb to the revenge. And then on the level of the atrocity, we lash out at the atrocity and we become part of the problem. So when we can transcend that, now there's a nuance here. We all know there's sometimes you have to fight. We all do, because we all have an inner warrior. The
Mm-hmm.
question is, and this is a really deep spiritual concept, it's pretty intense, Danica, on the Pretty Intense podcast. The question is less about whether or not you fight. What does the fight make you become? What do you become in the presence of the fight? Do you fight from the love of what you know is possible? And do you fight from the love of those that stand behind you in your family and in your community? Or do
Mm.
you fight from the hate of
Uh-huh.
those that your enemies,
Ah,
or from the fear of what happens if you don't?
yeah.
Ultimately, this is
Ah,
the spiritual battle. Do we allow ourselves to, and it's a deep, nuanced conversation.
right,
We're all going to get through this. The key
right.
is, what have we become? What did it make us into? Or maybe the deeper question, what did we allow the conditions of the world to make us into?
Mm,
That is how you determine whether or not, and it's not about winning. It's beyond, if you win, you're part of the battle. You don't want to win, you want to triumph. Triumph means you transcend the battle. It's beyond winning and losing. You triumph. And this is the easiest thing. How do we triumph? By living every day the best version of ourselves, whatever that means. Because when we celebrate our humanness, we celebrate our imagination, our creativity, our sovereignty, our freedom, our willingness to love fearlessly in this world without the consequences of what that loving means. When we do that, that is what this ancient battle of good and evil is all about. You've transcended the evil that keeps you stuck in the fear of what happens if you don't. And I think that's what's up for us all right now. So we just took a big, big journey.
that's so good. That makes real sense. I was curious how you were going to open that up and really explain the difference between the two because, for myself, I feel like I've been called into this new direction with the next year with politics. And, a while back, I was talking about loving this country, and people sort of attacked me as if I was some kind of extremist for that.
Sure.
And I feel called. I guess that's the best way I can say, like, out of love, I feel called to stand up for not only myself but other people who just want to love something. And I like that because I feel like I'm doing okay then, because I wasn't sure if I could
No,
participate in the arena at all, or if I needed to just continue to live my life as an example. But I can live my life as an example in the arena out of love.
absolutely. And I've been asked to run for political office twice
Oh, really?
in my state. And I have support to do that. I've opted not to because I was also, from people who have run previous presidential campaigns, they said that they felt I'd be more effective with a voice that's not beholden to any one constituency or
And you're
political
not a
party
career politician. You haven't been
for now. But
bought and
let me,
sold. Yeah.
can we talk about America for a minute? Are you
Yeah,
okay
I'd
with that?
love to.
I'm very passionate about this. I released a video on this, and it's caught a lot of heat for it. America is, in my opinion, this isn't science, this is my Gregg Braden opinion. I believe that America is a divinely inspired nation. And when I say that, and it's not just because of the history. Something happened here over 200 years ago that has never happened in any nation at any time in the history of the earth, where, and they were all males at the time, a group of men came together. And a lot of people don't know this, but they were, of those 56 signatures, at least 13 openly and probably more covertly were from the Masonic traditions.
Yeah.
The Masonic traditions are descendants of the Templar traditions. The Templars are who funded Columbus to found this nation as the first nation in the history of the world to embody the freedoms that we have in writing in a way that no other nation has ever or will ever give to its people. So now I'm going to make a distinction here. The idea of America, I believe, is rare and precious and beautiful and worth preserving. The implementation is deeply flawed. Many people are willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I talk to young people now who are being indoctrinated into the idea that America is evil and that America is bad, and that we are bad people and we need to start over. It's a nuance, Danica, and it's difficult sometimes. The implementation may be evil, and we have done evil things as a nation that I'm not proud of. The idea, I think, is worth preserving. And here's the reason. I traveled, I was home about 28 to 30 days in before COVID in 1 year. I was all over the world. And I would talk to people about their countries. And they'd say, well, what's the big deal about America? You know, we got free speech, you know, in Canada. We got free speech in Australia. You know, we can have guns in Switzerland, you know, or whatever. Here's the difference. You can until you can't. America is the only nation on the face of the earth has ever embodied in the written documents that those freedoms are inherent in our existence, that our government did not give them to us. And so the government cannot take them away from us. Oh, wow. That's what sets America apart. No government has ever given their people those freedoms. So the other countries, yeah, Australia had guns until the government said you can't have them anymore. Same with Canada. Same with freedom of speech. You know, we're losing our freedom of speech in this country. I don't even know how much of this conversation, how it will be received by some people, or how much of it makes it,
or maybe if it gets shadow banned. I mean, I've definitely had people on that reduce that.
But this is the thing. America is on the line as an idea, and there are people that want the idea of America to go away. Now, this is going to go back to the first 5 minutes of this conversation. Because when you want to move society toward the vision and the agenda and the contraction and the control that is necessary to meet those goals, you cannot do it with a nation that has the strong economy, that has the freedoms, the creativity, and the imagination. America becomes a problem in that. And you're seeing that play out in real time in our lives and in our world right now. So, and much of it is being predicated on the next 15 minutes of the conversation on the climate change narrative. They've latched onto that, and they're going to push that narrative. They've already told us we're going to have climate lockdowns, regional climate lockdowns, because there's too much CO2 in the air. What does that do? What's that do to someone who's living paycheck to paycheck, that loses the paycheck during that time? What's it do to a family business that's running on a shoestring? You can't run a restaurant and have the food prepared and not be able to use that food within a certain period of time. Sure. You can't do that. It is very, very destructive, and it hurts the people that can least afford it. And in my opinion, it's unnecessary. Why not? If this is a better world they want us to go to, why not honor us and come forward and say, look, we've been through a hard time as a planet, and there are some systems that are unsustainable. Let's work together. Let's work together and take this opportunity, and let's do something that helps everyone and build a world. And you be part of that world. You be part of that world. They are designing a world that we have no say in right now. So this kind of brings it all together. We've gone from the big picture of the visions and the agendas accomplished by 2030, ideally, some of them by 2035. And the narrative to support that agenda, to create the fear so that we relinquish freedoms, a lot of that's based on climate. The data simply doesn't support that narrative right now. The evidence doesn't support the narrative. And that's on a geophysical level. That's our environment. Now we're looking at the social and the biological level. We're not wired as a society, and we're not wired as biological beings for the kinds. We're not. They have what are called 15-minute cities. I think you've seen this.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Where people
Yeah.
are compressed into these living spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got the same living space. You walk, to your office, you walk to the gym, you walk to the restaurant. You're pretty much removed from nature unless you leave that 15-minute living space. They are discouraging rural living and making it very difficult for farmers, next gen farmers, the kids
Gotta
that want
love
to
the
be
farmers' protests that you see these days in other countries, huh?
well, I love it. I love it in Europe, but all of this. So if people want to know more about this, I mean, I'm not making this up. Read the book called The Great Reset, or go to YouTube and you can type in The Great Reset and you can see it coming out of the mouths of the people that believe it's a good thing. Part of the Great Reset, one of the proposals is to use artificial intelligence to create the correct Bible.
Mm.
And just let that
Oh
sink in.
man, we're
Just
not
let
gonna have
that sink.
time for it, but on another one, I watched you talk about the Torah and the
Yeah.
coding within the Torah and how they want to use AI to rewrite the Bible and the danger of that because it's essentially a ancient, extensive coding system within the Torah.
Exactly. So where we're going with this, America right now is our best bet for the freedoms of imagination and creativity, community, love, and sharing that allows us our divinity so that we can live the best version of ourselves. And whatever that means, is different for different people. But when we do that, and when we love without fear of loving ourselves and other people, and express our passions, whatever that means. When we do that, we have transcended this vision that is being laid out for us, and you don't have to fight. If you do fight, and there are times everybody has to use that warrior, ask yourself this question. I'm saying this to our community, Danica, not to you specifically, but ask yourself the question, what is this situation making me into? Am I becoming something that I would never choose to be in a million years? And if the answer to that is yes, it's the opportunity to rethink the response. And it doesn't mean you don't fight, but it means we fight from the love of what's possible rather than the fear of what's not. It means that we fight from the love of, I say behind this because I think of my family, my friends, and my community behind me, rather than my hate of those that might want to hurt us in front of us. What do we become in the presence of this, and how do we fight from love rather than fear? And I think it's a deeply spiritual conversation that's up for all of us right now, because
Wow.
you see the things in the media and it triggers us. What does it make us into? If you go through the day
Sure.
carrying anger and hate
Sure.
and deep hurt, and you don't have a way to resolve that, then you succumb to these other things. The way you resolve it, we did in our last podcast, is through coherence between the heart and the brain, where we're wired to be able to heal those deep hurts. And that's another conversation. So,
Oh, well, it's just a mirror, right? So that's
yeah.
why always doing the inner work is so valuable because it changes the way you perceive and see things and the reality that you live in when you change yourself. I mean, for sure that's been my experience and my journey over the last, 3, 5, 7 years is just, the work that I've done on the inside changes the way I exist in reality. So I think that's number one, the first place that we can start.
I agree. It begins with us. And it's the first time hearing that you have been invited in the political arena. I think you would be absolutely awesome.
And maybe asked to be in office on some level too. Like I was like, "What, me? Like I don't know anything about it." But the words were, "That's exactly who you need because that's what it used to be. That's what the system used to be. Government was not, it was people that were leading the way in the community and not necessarily career politicians that have just been in the fold forever. They were people that you don't need to know about government. You just need to know about what the people want. And while it's definitely not happening right now, and I can't see it happening, but I never say never. I think it's a good reminder of where we're at now and where things used to begin, because I think that a lot of times things do originate with a lot of positivity and good, and then man gets a hold of it. And I say man in general for all human beings, and gets a hold of it, and power, control, and greed come into it. But we have a chance to have a new world in a much different way than the one that they're trying to give us. So.
We do. And one of the reasons, first of all, thank you for that, Danica. And you speak so clearly, and people relate to you on such a really deep level and a very accessible level. If you choose to do that, I think you'd be really, I think you do really, really well. And
Same for you. You are an incredible speaker.
Well, thank you for that. I don't know if I don't know if I'm mean enough to be a politician. I don't know. But the other thing, when we started this, we talked about climate. One of the things I've found is that so many people are either fearful or they feel so guilty. They've been made to feel so guilty. So part of the reason that I wanted to develop that part of our conversation was maybe to relieve some of that guilt. And we didn't get to the part about alternative energy sources, but I just want people to know we have those sources. And if our politicians were serious about eliminating CO2, we would have been allowed to bring those energy sources forward decades ago. And we'll see them. But it tells me that there are other motives that are out there. So, Danica, I want to just tell you, it takes a lot of trust when you invite me on the program, because you don't know what I'm going to say to your community. And so I want to tell you how much I appreciate your trust. I hope, and I really hope, that you're okay, and the editing staff is okay with everything that we've said.
Greg, that was phenomenal.
Well, we want to do it responsibly and professionally, but honestly, truthfully, and factually, not to anger or make anyone wrong, but to show us how we can move in a positive direction. And I think that's really what's up for all of us right now. So thank you for the opportunity to do that.
Well said, Greg.
I appreciate it.
You were wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of peace of mind after this, and as well as inspiration. So thank you.
I hope so. All right. Thank you. Take good care. I look forward to our next.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.